If there's any one character I've talked about before or after today that embodies the concept of legacy in fighting games, it's Rock Howard. Rock is the son of Geese Howard, the main antagonist of the Fatal Fury series. Geese was distant from his family, either out of pure disinterest or to keep them safe from his own enemies, and didn't foster any kind of relationship with Rock. Rock's mother Marie fell ill at one point, which prompted Rock to seek out his father to request his aid. These requests fell on deaf ears, and Marie apparently passed away, imbuing a deep hatred for the man within Rock. Geese Howard, being the main crime boss of Southtown, the setting of the Fatal Fury games, among others, came into conflict with Terry Bogard numerous times, with at least one of those encounters ending with Geese falling off of his own tower and being presumed dead. This would all come to a head during the event of Real Bout Fatal Fury, where Geese would once again find himself falling from the top of his tower. This time though, Terry reaches out to save Geese from falling. Geese, being a prideful, spiteful man, and knowing that his death would make Terry a murderer, instead slaps his hand away and willingly falls to his death, laughing maniacally the entire way down. Terry, refusing to continue the cycle of violence and vengeance that led to his own adoptive father's death at the hands of Geese that would spark he and his brother Andy's own quest for vengeance, instead took Rock into his care. Rock's first canonical appearance in the series was in Terry's ending in Fatal Fury 3, and he'd appear in Terry's endings in both Real Bout games, before aging up in the time skip after Real Bout and becoming the protagonist of Gyro: Mark of the Wolves. In Mark of the Wolves, a new King of Fighters tournament is held in the new peaceful Southtown, christened Second Southtown, prompting Terry and Rock to enter. Rock wins the tournament and discovers at its end that its host Kane is actually his uncle, being the brother of Rock's mom, who Kane also implies is still actually alive. Rock informs Terry of this and the two go their separate ways, with Rock promising to return after investigating these new developments with Kane. There's been multiple instances over the years of fighting games attempting to push things forward with a new generation of characters hoping to supplant the older cast, and it doesn't always end up successful. For every well-executed example, like the cast of Tekken 3 or the Combat Kids in Mortal Kombat 10 onwards, you get stuff like the Soul Calibur 5 cast, or even, despite them retroactively being looked upon more fondly these days, the Street Fighter 3 newcomers. I think Mark of the Wolves and their cast, and Rock specifically, are an example of the former. Rock is hands down one of the coolest fighting game characters ever, and it comes down to a mix of his character design as well as the legacy he represents and how that paints not only his backstory, but how he plays in any given fighting game. Mark of the Wolves is generally considered to be one of SNK's swan songs alongside King of Fighters 2000 and Metal Slug 3, before temporarily going out of business due to financial troubles, and it's clear that a lot of love and labor was put into the game. Mark of the Wolves is generally cited as SNK's counterpart to Street Fighter 3 Third Strike, both aesthetically and mechanically, and that's pretty high praise for Gyro, especially considering the game was still more or less using the same Neo Geo hardware that SNK had been using for close to a decade. SNK's always been a stickler for detail when it comes to character animation, and Rock is definitely one of their best examples of this. The way his jacket bounces and his pants crease in his idle animation is just incredible, to say nothing of the little animation flourishes he has after every attack. Sugar Punch has a really well done video going into the nitty gritty of Rock's character design and animation in Gyro, and I highly recommend checking it out. As I mentioned earlier, Rock embodies the concept of legacy, and that goes for his moveset as well. Rock primarily uses a combination of techniques learned from Terry and abilities he inherited from Geese, combining the two styles into a very interesting mix that Rock can call his own, without feeling like a clone of one or the other. He, unfortunately, kind of sucks at a competitive level in Gyro, but he's still really fun to play in spite of that. Rock made his debut in the Capcom vs games in Capcom vs SNK 2, being the lone character representing Mark of the Wolves, not counting Terry. I think Capcom did a pretty good job implementing him, and he's definitely one of the better characters on the SNK side of the roster. I don't think he's animated quite as fluidly as he is in Gyro, but they did a pretty bang up job nonetheless. All that aside, let's get into his moveset. Rock is a pretty well-rounded character in CVS 2, having a lot of tools for a lot of situations, though some are admittedly less than ideal. He works well in most grooves in the game, with K-Groove in particular being a standout, as it greatly bolsters his offensive options when its rage effect sets in. His sole command normal is done by pressing forward in medium punch. It's pretty slow, but it's an overhead and it also leaves him plus on block. Next up are his special moves. First is Reppuken, which he of course inherits from his dear old dad. If you do a quarter circle forward motion in heavy punch, Rock will use double Reppuken, also taken from Geese. Next up is Rising Tackle. This is a fantastic anti-air taken from Terry, with its only drawback being that it's a charge move. Next up is Crack Counter. This one's really fun because it's a combination of Geese's trademark counters and Terry's crack shoot. Like Geese, Rock has 3 variations of this attack, depending on which kick button is pressed. Medium counters mids, and heavy counters lows. Next up is Hard Edge. The heavy version of this has a follow-up that deals an extra hit. Rage Run is a series of command runs that Rock can initiate with quarter circle back and kick. First is Type Dunk, which is done with light kick and based partially on Terry's power dunk. Next is Type Save, which allows him to stop his initiated run. He didn't have this in Mark of the Wolves, so this is actually a new addition to him in CVS 2. Last is Type Shift, a pretty useful cross-up dash that phases through the opponent. Up next is Shinkunage, Rock's command throw inherited from Geese. Holding all 3 punch buttons after it has Rock follow up with Resetsu, though it must be timed correctly. Do keep in mind that if you only tap the 3 punch buttons instead, Rock will cancel back into neutral, giving him some new follow-up options. Next up are his supers. First is Raging Storm, taken from Geese. Thankfully, like in Mark of the Wolves, it has a much simpler input than his dad's iconic pretzel input. The heavy punch variation of this is based on the power move version of it in Mark of the Wolves and does more damage, in addition to Rock being able to hold the move temporarily before firing it off.
What we like to call big damage.
Shine Knuckle is Rock's second super. Like Raging Storm, the heavy punch variation of this is taken from the power move version in Mark of the Wolves and tacks on a Rising Tackle for additional damage at the end of it. Last, but certainly not least, is Neo Deadly Rave. Deadly Rave is a devastating series of attacks first used by Geese in Art of Fighting 2. What makes the move unique is that after the initial input, you must then input a series of specifically timed commands in order to complete the attack. The final hit can usually be foregone in favor of continuing with a combo of your own. The button sequence is as follows. Like in Mark of the Wolves, if Rock uses a Raging Storm to win a round, you'll get this special win pose of him struggling to hold back his inherited power. Rock has 2 special intros in Capcom vs. SNK 2.
This is gonna be a match to remember. Fight! Come on. Live and let die. Fight!
Here are all of Rock's colors.
Lyrics like the bass with the trouble. Take a deep breath, getting funky as my lungs release a solid rhyme. Never stop, so I continue on. With the first word is white, word is born. I made your imperfection, not indulgent fantasy. Take a mind and then start. Be like me. Listen closely, approach me. Something close. Those who try to treat me like greater than close to impossible.
Rock is without question one of the coolest characters to come from the house of SNK. He really does touch upon just about everything that makes fighting games cool, both lore-wise, design-wise, and even mechanically speaking. He easily represents some of SNK's finest work, and it's pretty understandable why no one at SNK wanted to touch the character in mainline KOF for such a long time, being so sacred. I grew up mostly a Capcom fan, but the first real bout, KOF 2000, and Gyro are the 3 main SNK games I have nostalgia for, and seeing the evolution from Real Bout to Gyro in particular is what made me a fan. I know CVS2 was largely a lot of people's introduction to the character in the West, since Capcom had more of a foothold here than SNK, and I'm really happy that they included him. I wouldn't be surprised if CVS in general was a lot of genre newcomers' gateway to SNK as a whole. It's just a shame that we'll never see Rock's story get completed, and we'll always be left wondering what'll happen after he left with Kane at the end of Mark of the Wolves. At least, that's how this video would have ended had I made it this time last year. But against all odds, at EVO 2022, SNK announced that a new Fatal Fury game set after the events of Mark of the Wolves was in development, with Rock and Kane poised to return, alongside Billy Kane appearing in mainline Fatal Fury for the first time since Wild Ambition. And just last week at EVO Japan, we got confirmation that the OG Fatal Fury trio of Terry, rocking his immaculate Mark of the Wolves redesign, would be returning alongside Andy and Joe, officially making their first canonical post-time skip appearances in Fatal Fury. Things are finally starting to look up for SNK as a whole, and who knows what the future may bring. After all, the future is now. As always, thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next episode of Capcom vs. Legacy.